So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
I'm Grant.
And today we're joined by Aardwolf.
Hi.
From Aardwolf's Lair. And he genuinely always sounds like that all the time.
I am smiling.
Happy.
I've been saying that for years before Gurney Halleck did it, actually.
So if you don't know Aardwolf, get out from under the rock that you live in.
Yeah.
He's got a YouTube channel where he does a lot of wargaming content, a lot of RPG Traveler content as well.
Not as much as I'd like, but yeah, some.
But he's...
And this man has the collection of
Yes.
collections.
I got too much stuff.
I know.
I really do. Have too
I
much
bet you've
stuff.
got 500 games.
It depends how you count ASL.
Okay. Is each box a different game, or is it
no,
just one game?
It's ASL. It's one game.
Right. But
So
it really is 35 different expansions.
it's like 40 boxes.
Yeah.
So it takes up the space of 60 games.
Yes.
I'm
Nice.
not exaggerating.
Well, every time we meet you,
No,
every
true,
time we
yes.
meet you, we've seen you at Origins. You're always like, oh, I got to go buy this game, or I got to go do this.
Yes.
I'm picking this one up because
Yes.
it needs my collection. I like that. I'm a collector as well.
So I'm reprioritizing though. I would like to buy a room to put the games in. So that's the current goal. So we're trying to cut back a little bit, trying to manage it a little better, and everybody's got finite time, right? So
Yes.
Sure.
now we of course have unlimited time here in Columbus, Ohio, to play OCS.
Speaking of Columbus, Ohio, we're here at Buckeye Game Fest, which is a local convention that's great, and it's been a blast so far. And you've been running an OCS kind of training, teaching game, and so that's what we've got here at Smolensk. Barbarossa derailed from MMP, and
Designed by John Kisner
yes, and
from a series designed by Dean Essig.
you have
The-
a very different
the-
collection from what we have as well.
I'd say there's a decent amount of overlap, but yeah,
Sure, but
that's
like,
fair.
You have and play regularly OCS.
Yes.
You have and used to play at least ASL. I know
Yeah.
you've got some big Napoleonics, a lot of great battles of the American Civil War, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to those ones as often as we'd like. And OCS is one that I have one on my shelf. We'd never played it, so I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to sit down and teach us that.
Sure, and
So-
we did a little bit of that today, and
Yeah.
I think I had about 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 people come in and out of the OCS of the OCS games, and everybody liked it, but you guys. So
We loved it.
okay, well, good. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming into it, knowing that hey, this is a big game, it's a heavy game, it's a logistics heavy game, it's a bit of a fussy game. What were your impressions?
So a couple things that I really enjoyed about it. It is very focused on supply. Everything you do from fighting to moving is based on that, right? You have to have the number of supply points within either delivery or throwing, and there's some distinctions there.
Yep.
And it's just, to me, it's very interesting. A lot of those supply points are determined by a roll.
And your maneuver has to support that as well. So
Yes.
you have to stay, or you want to stay where you can reach the supply, or from where the supply can be thrown to you.
So I thought it was going to be kind of that crunchy, looking for the connections here. That is not what this is about. It's
Not
about
really.
trying to match what you've got, the number of supply you have, to do what you want to do. And to me, that's just another tactic or strategy you're dealing with in a big war game. And I liked it. I really enjoyed our 2-hour informal one-turn messing around. It was very cool.
We ran one German turn. Early in the game, the Germans are on the attack, so it's a lot easier to demonstrate OCS in Smolensk with the Germans in the opening. The Soviets get a lot of chances to counterattack later on in the campaign, but the Germans are attacking almost every turn, and for the first half dozen turns, basically until their supply runs out, which, thanks to Alexander's rolling,
Very
they
quick.
did. So the German offensive in the south did peter out a little bit, really just for lack of supply. The supply coming in for turn 3, which is the turn that we played, was about half of what it should have been. And that really limited German ability to project panzer divisions to the other side of the Dnieper.
So the rule book for this game is a rule book that I think a lot of people kind of see and it kind of like looks pretty dense.
It is an intimidating
and it's very detailed as well, because there's lots of different kind of steps and a lot of different notations for things, and so I appreciated having that explained to me. there are times where I'm very much a visual learner, and being able to see this is what you're doing. Being able to see that, and then read it retroactively, it's like, oh yeah, I have a frame of reference to what it's talking about when it's doing this. I think that's also was very, very helpful and important as well.
So this is like a 20, I think it's 25 years this year, maybe it's 30, I'm not sure. There's an anniversary of OCS this year, I'd have to look at actual dates. But the series has been around for a long time, and the rulebook has been iterated upon and iterated upon and iterated upon. This is game 17 in the series.
How many are there in addition to that, other than just, this was a couple years ago, right?
There's 2 that came out after
So
this,
19.
so there's 19 right
Okay.
now. So the rulebook is extremely polished. It's not necessarily the easiest reading rule book, and it's certainly not the easiest learning rule book. But once you have seen the game in action and have started to see the pieces and kind of put the gestalt in your head together about how OCS works and what you need to do to succeed at it, the rule book becomes very clear. Almost all the answers that you need. Very seldom do we have a rules question that ends up not being in the book. It's almost always in the book. The index is excellent. There's an index that helps too, and there's also a glossary which also helps. And it does have a fair amount of jargon. So some of the jargon is colloquial jargon that the players came up with, and some of it's actually part of the game, like hip shoots, for example.
Yes. What's the real name for those in the game?
Hip shoots.
Oh, okay.
That's what they're called. That's a kind of a Dean trademark, is to come up with
odd
maybe a name that might seem anachronistic or more contemporary than the topic,
Okay.
right? There are, and sometimes those names are very contemporary with the topic, like the Cowardly Legs actually comes from a quote of Lincoln's that he used in Line of Battle. Hip shoots, I don't know if, run and gun close air support was ever called that historically.
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah, it sounds good.
So we've played a few games that deal with supply as like a major mechanic of it, but nothing quite on this scale or with this level of detail is what I would say. So I'm thinking about things like supply lines of the American Revolution from Hollenspiel,
Which I have played in, which is excellent.
and even something like Race to the Rhine or Race to Moscow. It's a game of pushing forwards, but you've got to maintain your supply lines, and then any number of other hex and counter games.
Every war game deals with supply, just not to this level.
Not true.
Right.
Iron
Not
Curtain
true?
does not, completely ignores it.
Okay.
There is
well,
no supply in Iron Curtain.
Wow.
Sure, but like
That's weird, but
Yeah.
it's almost all war games, at least in an abstract way, deal with supply to some
Right.
extent.
yeah, seeing it played out and walking through it, where you're like, I roll my die for some supply points, and that's where I get, where do I put those? Where do they physically go? And then I'm going up my lines towards my HQs, and then I've got HQs can then spread some this way and draw this way, and then there's extenders and other forms of transportation to get those further out as well. And seeing the physical mechanism of the supply, and then you literally, like you said, cannot do anything without it.
Yeah.
You use it for basically everything.
You can walk forward with
With
infantry.
leg units.
And
Yes.
like that's
and that's it.
it. And so, yeah. And how often do you want to do that?
Well, in the Soviets' case, they walk backward with leg
Yeah,
units.
yeah, quite a
Yes.
bit.
In this particular case. And you guys didn't really get to see this, but if we had another couple hours, would have been interesting to give you a different situation with where the Soviets are on the attack and see how differently they attack.
Yeah.
I've played quite a bit of OCS with later war Soviets where the Soviets are on the attack, and the doctrine is completely different, and it's modeled differently in the system. So in the Germans' case, they're very dependent on these mobile, very highly mobile units, the Panzer divisions, to form these armored spearheads to punch through the line and then exploit out through the gap that they've just created. The Soviets in most OCS games are very poor in those kinds of units. They have to depend on massed infantry attacks. They have, generally speaking, lower action ratings, which is the simplification to call it just troop quality, but that's part of it. They have to be able to leverage mass more so than the Germans do. The Germans have more ability to focus quality on the enemy. And where the supply gets expended is that the Germans spend a lot more supply for fuel. The Soviets spend a lot more supply for combat and barrages.
Barrages was
yeah.
something that was interesting in this because you're paying for it with your supply, but the actual execution, where you're committing guys and they have values on them, and the table that you roll on, felt somewhat familiar to me having played SCS. I felt like the the mechanic of that, when you were doing it, I'm like, I know exactly what you're
Felt
about to do
familiar.
with those. That felt very familiar. There's a couple extra layers in this with the things that the outcomes of barrages at least. But it was interesting to see that there's some of those familiarities with some of Dean's designs through different systems as well.
And also, as in SCS, but although it's a bit different, the artillery is used to support offensive or defensive
Yes.
operations. You are not attacking with artillery,
No.
right? And that's kind of where people get stuck on the idea that, well, it costs so much supply. It does cost a lot of supply, but you're not attacking with it. You're using it to support attacks. So you do have to be careful and judicious with it. You in nowhere have enough supply to fire every artillery piece. And you tend sometimes to feel like, boy, I got a lot of artillery floating around here that I can't use because I don't have the supply to use it. And that can get super frustrating, especially when you roll a 3 on the supply roll at the beginning of the turn.
I think it was a 4.
It might have been a 4.
It was
3 and 4 is the same result on the
terribly
table.
the same.
It
Yes.
doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I was so proud. It was the exact kind of roll I make
and
all
the
the time.
irony, he rolled boxcars for the rebuild
For the replacements,
points,
yep.
replacement
Yep.
points.
So I had lots of troops. Couldn't use
Couldn't
any
use
of
them.
them.
Hilarious.
Classic.
That's classic Alexander.
Isn't it
It really
just?
is.
Yep.
It's the hope that kills you.
I think aside from the supply, some of the things that I thought were cool, putting units in reserve, able to kind of go after your rounds of attacks and move up and fill gaps.
It
or
forces you to
explore.
plan.
Yeah, and that was cool. I thought a very interesting concept. There also, I liked how it used the air power. I thought that was pretty nifty. You had a ton of, as the Germans, you had like, I think 20 aircraft over there.
There's a lot of area.
And they had ranges on them. You know, some of them, like Dorniers, were 70 spaces.
Yeah.
And then some of them were
Couldn't reach
20 or
the
25.
action in the
Yeah.
middle of the map. That's true.
I thought that was unique and interesting and would really change the way the game plays as you push further and further in. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and the air model is very playable in OCS. Some of the antecedent games have sort of what we'll call a bloated air model, where we had, and this is not an exaggeration, we played in our War in the Desert game last week. We had one combat in the Allied turn with 65 air counters in it.
Wow.
This is a ground combat with 65 air counters, where that simply OCS air doesn't work that way, right?
And that's North Africa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is North Africa, right?
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is not like June 5th.
Yeah, right.
So it's very playable, it's very manageable, and yet it does what the artillery does. It supports the ground action.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to use that tactical air to help in ground support, to help, disorganize the units that you're going to attack. Or to disorganize the units that you think the enemy is going to use to attack, which is a thing that you can do with air.
Because disorganization has your, is it your troop value or your attack?
No, it has your attack and movement, but
Okay.
it only is -1 to AR. But -1
Okay.
to AR is big,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Especially when a lot of the Soviet ARs are
twos
1,
or
right?
1,
So
yeah.
there's some zeros. There's a fair number of these.
Yeah, I saw at least some zeros.
Zero AR Soviet rifle divisions that are really not very good and that get fed into the meat grinder as fast as possible and never get rebuilt.
And ARs, if you're interested, that's important because if I have a very high AR and I compare that to your low AR, the difference between those is the number of column shifts that
Yeah.
we're going to end up getting. And so,
Yeah, if there is
It's-
surprise and
it can
a
be
big differential,
very intense.
it more readily leads to surprise.
Talk about that surprise roll. Is that in all OCS
Yes.
games?
Yeah, that's core. So one of the comments that I got was, "Wow, the combat is incredibly simple in this game. There's like hardly any DRMs," which is all true. But it's a 3-step combat. You declare the attack and pay the supply. You roll the surprise, and we roll all the dice at the same time. You check for surprise, and if there is surprise, then there may be column shifts from the surprise. That may be the attacker walking into an ambush, or it may be the attacker catching the defender unprepared. It can go either way, but a larger action rating differential more easily leads to surprise. So you never really know, you never have that situation as we do in Europa, where I just count out the exact number of factors I need to get 5 to 1 or whatever it is, and that's how many I put in the combat, and that's it. You never know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
We had this attack down here at whatever the hell this place is called.
It's covered in counters.
Yes, it's covered in counters at the moment, and I've been talking all day. But we had, a big German infantry assault on a city that was relatively strongly held by the Soviets, and it could have gone either way, and they bounced. We had a situation on the first turn where there's a Soviet rifle. The Germans were just starting to advance. There was a Soviet rifle division dug in a swamp, and by dug in I don't mean
right here,
right up here in the north,
on your axis of advance.
And they're not in a hedgehog or anything like that. It's not an actual fortified position. A Panzer division rolled across the river, tried to overrun it, failed, killed 2 units of the Panzer division. Tried to overrun again, failed, killed 2 units of the Panzer division. Now there's 1 unit left in the Panzer division attacking, and we attacked it and failed again. So this rifle,
is right here,
the 12th Panzer division, completely annihilated by a Soviet rifle division.
That's awesome.
On September 8th or July 8th.
I did notice when you were talking about the game and the different boxes over here. I was like, man, that's a lot of dead Panzers.
The odds of that are horrendously low, right?
Yeah.
So there's a +4 or 5 on that roll for the surprise roll for Germans. You only need a 5 on 2d6 to get surprise as the attacker. And at no point did surprise happen, and he bottomed out on the table every time. So
that's what's great about war games,
Yeah.
right? A lot of those narratives are told from a desperate defense or an amazing attack where you need to roll a 1 and you rolled it. That's what makes wargaming interesting.
That combined with a very simple fog of war rule where you can't look at the other people's stacks means that you never know what you're going to get when you go into attack. You have to commit forces that you feel are going to be adequate to achieve the objective. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they will blast through and there will be a smashing success and there's champagne afterwards. And sometimes people will be shot.
One of my favorite parts of what we experienced was the combat results table, because, I think it's becoming one of my favorite parts of wargaming is games that include optionality in it. And so a lot of the results were there was attacker option, defender option. And so you can either choose to retreat from your attack if you mess it up,
and not take any wounds,
or you can choose to take a loss, and then that forces, if you exercise your option, that forces the defender to do the same thing. And anytime a die result then leads to more decision points, that's always something that's interesting to me, because then you're weighing up how hard am I going into this? How desperately do I need to take this or to break out of this?
As opposed to next turn.
And in this game, I think even more than in some others, where you're just against the clock here is both time on the turn track, but also in your supplies. There is very finite resources, and they're very precious, and you're I got to take the loss because I've got to make the advance.
So one game that we played that kind of used it in a different way, it didn't have CRTs. I don't remember. Soissons?
Yeah, decisive victory, yeah.
It had that you can attack, and you can choose as the attacker. You always had to take a reduction to do damage. Now, you can decide to take a second to do a second damage. So it was the same kind of, there was a choice. It wasn't die rolling on a CRT. But you know what? I liked it because you had to make that decision. At what point do I make myself combat ineffective because I'm just trying to kill him, and he doesn't really care because he's defending. So very interesting. I liked that choice. The other thing I thought was very cool was the position. What was it called? Attack position, or what was it where you flipped it over and your movement changed?
Oh, the move mode versus combat mode.
Yeah. I thought that was very cool and unique. I haven't seen that in a lot of games we've played.
No.
I've seen it in a few games. It's definitely an interesting hallmark of OCS, and actually BCS uses it. The terminology is different in BCS, but there's a similar thing where there's a sort of a march mode and a deployed mode on each side.
I think TCS has it too.
I've never played TCS, so
we have area.
I've read through it, and I think that has it too.
At some point, I'd like to. It's on the bucket list. It's interesting that you guys should mention the combat decisions on the combat options, because other people this weekend have actually mentioned that to me too. It's something they really liked. Is the decision space inside the combat results, where you have the attacker losses and the defender losses, and then the attacker options and the defender options. And in some cases, the attacker will say, it's not worth it to me to hold this hex that I'm in and to try to grind the enemy down additionally this turn. I can wait. I will retreat. Okay, they'll pull back before they take big losses, or they might decide, as the 12th Panzer did, that they have to take this hex this turn, and they're going to keep fighting until they do. Oh, where is everybody? They're all dead. So, and that's a thing. That's a thing that can happen. That's a super unusual situation there, though.
Yeah, choice in these kind of war games is always very interesting because sometimes we feel like it's just move up, get into a line, put your odds together, roll a die. But those choices, to me, makes for a very interesting experience because I got to make a decision.
Yes, and I think generally speaking, I think the deeper they get into wargaming, people want that greater decision space, the greater responsibility as a general or as a commander to be like, yes, this is what we do. It's not just the mercy of the dice roll. The dice roll gives you options, and I think that's really cool in this as well.
The dice rolls, this is something I think is true in a lot of different kinds of gaming, is that the dice rolls and the dice roll results guide the narrative, right?
Yes.
You're making the decisions, but the point, once you've made the decision, the fork that the narrative takes is up to the dice. And sometimes it goes the way you don't want it to go.
Yes, but I think this one gives you more branches than just a binary, which was neat. And I think the other thing that was a revelation when you were explaining this and kind of going through it is the game is almost entirely more about maneuver than it is about focused combat. So you got to do combats, but I'm trying to position myself to encircle people to ruin their supply stuff. I'm trying to keep my supply stuff intact. So I'm trying to keep my battle lines together and protect what I've got and my extenders and HQs and things like that. It was interesting to see that play out. I've played a number of games where you're just like, okay, run around and you do those kinds of things, but how important it was and how it was like, yeah, I'm not going to waste my supply attacking. I'll just drive around and cut you off. You'll be dead.
Yeah, in that supply is very finite, and you never have supply. The designers of OCS games tend to say things like, I will tune the supply such that everybody says I don't have enough supply. And that's probably where it's correct. Because it's supposed to play that way, right? It's supposed to be a finite resource. It's supposed to incentivize maneuver over combat. That's what the combat model and the supply model and the logistics all are trying to simulate.
Well, it was interesting on this left flank, whatever this place is called.
This is Vitebsk.
Vitebsk. You had mentioned, the Germans encircled the Soviets there, and it was like Germans didn't want to waste their supply nor their units trying to attack and kill them. They were just hoping they would attrit out.
Yep. And they will, eventually.
Eventually. It might take another 2 or 3 turns. And then you got to make a decision. Is that slowing my axis of advance down, or am I losing ground?
Yep.
But I thought that was interesting. I always love it when you can see things encircled and pockets formed, and it's just unique and interesting, and that's the way war works. Right?
And it happened a lot on the East Front of World War II, too. There were large pockets and small pockets.
Usually it was like hundreds of thousands or 50
there were times where it was.
We see huge pockets form in something like Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2, where you might annihilate an entire Soviet army that just gets pocketed, and they don't have the ARs to survive the attrition. So they just all die. I know what the action ratings of these Soviet troops surrounded in Vitebsk are like, and chances of them hanging on for 3 turns are pretty low. So, but you don't know that because
does that rating drop every turn?
No, it does not. Okay. It's just a roll. But and you don't know, the German player doesn't know whether there's a headquarters in there.
That's true.
And a headquarters being in there might cause that to be able to hang on for a couple more turns, too, based on game-specific rules here in Smolensk. So you never know. It's a beautiful, elegant, very simple. Don't look at the other person's stacks. Fog of War rule that adds so much to the game.
Yeah, I did. I appreciated that. Is that an alternative optional rule?
No, that's core. That's core.
Cool. Okay.
And there is an art to what unit I want to put on top. Do I put the bad unit on top to give you the impression that it's a whole stack of chumps, Or do I put the best unit on top to make you think that it is a stack they better not mess with?
Yeah.
What do I choose to hide versus what do I choose to show? I tell people I hide everything, but that's not always true. Sometimes I'll do things like put a juicy looking unit on top to try to tempt the other fella into thinking that's just artillery in that stack, for example. And it's not. And they get well, the first time we hit Mogilev is what this city is actually. The first time the Germans hit that, the previous turn, they got uncomfortable surprise when there were Russian troops in there, highly motivated by the NKVD. So, which raised the action rating of the stack to the point where the Germans have bounced off of it twice now.
So if someone out there was trying to get into OCS, why is this the one that they would start with, and is it?
I am asked this question all the time. There have been a number of OCS games that have been sort of recommended for new players or new players to OCS, and which have been designed that way. Reluctant Enemies is one, Tunisia 2 is one, a variety of other games. I've often recommended OCS Korea, which is pretty good. I like Smolensk because it's one map. The density it's not a super huge game, but the unit density is relatively high because it's operational East Front. But I like Smolensk because it shows you all of the moving pieces of OCS. It shows you surprise, it shows you extenders, it shows you hedgehogs, it shows you everything. And all of those other games are missing some of those things. In addition, especially as the Germans, it shows you all of those things really early in the campaign. We talked earlier about the need. One of the key components of the supply puzzle in OCS are these extenders, right, which you can use to extend your supply lines. You have to figure out in the first 2 turns what hex is that supply extender going in on the 3rd or 4th turn, right? You need to figure out where you're putting those, and you're going to end up with at least one and maybe as many as 3 extenders by like turn 4. You need to know where to put those so as to maximize the potential axis of advance. And Smolensk shows you all of those things. This was like my 4th OCS game that I played, I think. This is the game that made me feel comfortable that I was starting to understand what the hell was going on in this thing. Right? It's a puzzle.
Is this 4 counter sheets?
I believe it's 3.
And it's a one map.
It's one map, yeah.
To me, that's a good.
There's a lot of markers
sign.
too. There's at least one sheet of markers. So there might even be 2 sheets of markers in here. So like I said, most of the counters are on the map here. It's not much bigger than this. Yeah. But you could see there's some decent sized stacks. And most of the decent sized stacks are because there's a lot of supply in those stacks. And there are options to keep that stuff off map if you don't want to deal with it.
So a couple things I want to say about you, Gary.
Oh, sure.
Just so you know, I was impressed with your manual dexterity.
Oh, really? I fumbled so many counters.
You only dropped like 35. That wasn't bad compared to as a percentage of what you moved.
Okay, that's fair.
I was very impressed.
That's fair.
Because our fat fingers typically destroy these kinds of
like
stacks.
we don't even mess with stuff that's
it's
this
sad.
big.
So
I have tweezers.
Yeah, well, we do too. We're not total novices. We do have some tweezers. The second thing, I really appreciated your no-nonsense, matter-of-fact presentation. I thought sitting down with you it was about 2.5 hours, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
I really felt I walked away from it that I could get this rule book and understand it and play it. Now, that was fortunate for us, right? Isn't that the old way, the old saying everybody says, get someone that has played it to explain it?
Well, yeah.
But in this game, more than so many others, it's very valid.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I mean, you can memorize that rule book if you want and still be a total garbage OCS player. You really do need to, in my opinion, to see all the pieces moving, to start to put your fingers in the holes that exist in the puzzle here, and before you really start to understand it.
So I thought your presentation was great.
Well,
I thought your teaching was good.
He's being nice.
No, it was. I was very impressed. So.
He's so polite.
I also really like the dice roller.
He's such a nice young man.
Too.
This
I
is
love the dice
the
roller.
world's most decadent
It was like $15.
dice
right?
roll. $13 on Amazon.
$13.
Sold out.
Yeah.
Thanks to my video.
Yeah, this thing's great. But
Runs on 2 AA batteries.
That's a good roll too.
That is a good roll.
I remember we saw people playing GTS at WBC.
Yeah.
And they had a bottle.
It was like a Jiffy peanut butter jar that they emptied out clean.
It was super loud.
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
and they would go.
and it was
Wow. It was awesome.
great.
That's fantastic.
But
No,
yeah.
these are incredibly cheesy. I brought 3 dice towers, so I mean, I might as well.
Well, I'm going
Might
to
as
get
well
one of
use
these.
this.
Oh,
yeah,
come
you
back
totally
in
should.
stock. I'm going to get 2 or 3
without
of
doubt.
these.
You totally should.
And I
This
want
will
one
be
of the
the
big
next one.
ones because I want to do some RPG dice in it.
Oh yeah, I want one of the
as
big ones
well.
now too. There's
Yeah.
there's a larger model that's like the size of a salad bowl. We gotta have that.
So yes, not necessary for OCS,
But helpful.
but yes,
But always welcome.
if you if you're ever at a convention or you see people playing this, generally speaking, players of this game love it, and
Yeah.
they're probably extremely happy to like have you watch and maybe kind of talk you through some of the stuff. So don't be afraid to like have someone teach you some of the stuff, because I feel much more confident diving into that
yeah.
rule book and having a much better understanding of picking it up and doing it.
And there's a big OCS play community, and all the Vassal modules. I'm not all the mess, but most of the Vassal modules are really good.
Very good.
So there's people playing on Vassal. The development is all really
How
good.
many people here in Columbus do you regularly play OCS and some of these big ones with?
There's about 6.
Okay.
We regularly play
That's
with
impressive.
about 4.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So we have played OCS as often as 3 times a week, and then I got a job and I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So we can't do that now.
Got
But it was happening for a while. So we get all the OCS playing you want here is in Central Ohio, pretty much.
Well, I want to thank you. It
Yes.
was great. It was fun. I mean, 2.5 hours, and it felt like it was 25 minutes. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very
Great,
much.
thanks. I'm glad you guys had fun with it. I'm glad you guys got to make it to Buckeye Game
Yeah.
Fest again and had fun here. So
Yes, appreciate you very much for showing us this, and appreciate you guys for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayers8.com.
And I'm Grant.